Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. And today we're going to be diving into Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game.
Oh, yeah. That's going to be a good one.
It's a really fascinating book that explores this really kind of interesting concept of, how to play the long game in business and in life, and even how we think about competition in a whole new way.
Yeah, that's right.
So, are you familiar with Sinek's work in general?
Yeah, I mean, I've read a few of his books and seen some of his talks. He's got some really thought-provoking ideas about leadership and purpose.
For sure. For sure. So in The Infinite Game, Sinek starts off by kind of laying out this core concept of finite versus infinite games. Have you ever heard of that before?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that really resonates with a lot of people because it's so simple but so powerful.
I know. When I first read it, I was like, oh my God, it's kind of obvious in a way, but it's not something that you always consciously think about.
Exactly.
So maybe for our listeners who might not be familiar with this idea, could you just kind of briefly explain the distinction between finite and infinite games?
Sure. So the way Sinek explains it, finite games are like, your typical games with like a set of rules and a clear winner and a loser.
Right, like a football game.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Or like a chess game, or even like an election.
Right.
And the goal is to basically outsmart your opponent and come out on top.
Okay. So then what makes an infinite game different?
So infinite games are more like, the game of life or building a business or raising a family.
Okay.
Where there's no defined endpoint. The players can change. The rules can even change over time. And the goal is not necessarily to win, but to keep playing, to keep perpetuating the game itself.
Okay. That's a really interesting way to think about it. So it's almost like with finite games, there's this like scarcity mindset, right?
Yeah.
There's only so much to go around, so you have to fight for your share.
Exactly. It's a zero-sum game.
But with infinite games, it's more about abundance. It's about creating value, about making the pie bigger for everyone.
Yeah, I like that analogy. It's about contributing to something bigger than yourself.
Okay, so then what happens when we try to apply this finite game mindset to these infinite games?
That's where things get really interesting because Sinek argues that when we approach infinite games with a finite mindset, we actually end up undermining our own success in the long run.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it. If you're constantly focused on beating the competition, on hitting those short-term targets, you might achieve some initial success, but you're also likely to cut corners, to burn out your team, and to lose sight of the bigger picture.
Right. So it's like you're winning battles but losing the war.
Exactly. And in the infinite game, the war never really ends. So you need a different approach. You need to be playing for the long haul.
Okay. So then what does it look like to play the infinite game effectively?
Well, that's what we're going to be exploring in this deep dive. But Sinek lays out a number of key principles that are really essential for success in the infinite game.
Okay, great. I'm excited to dig into that.
Yeah, me too.
So one of the first things Sinek talks about is the importance of having a just cause.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Now, this is different from just having a mission statement or even like a set of values, right?
Exactly.
It's like something bigger, something more aspirational that really drives your actions and inspires others.
Yeah, it's something you believe in so deeply that you're willing to sacrifice for it, to fight for it, to even risk failure for it.
And Sinek argues that having a strong just cause is actually essential for success in the infinite game. Why is that?
Well, for a few reasons. First of all, it gives you a sense of purpose, a reason to keep playing even when things get tough. Second, it helps you attract and retain the right people, those who share your values and are passionate about your cause. And third, it gives you a framework for making decisions, for navigating those ethical dilemmas that inevitably come up in any long-term endeavor.
Okay, so a just cause is like a guiding star.
Yeah, I like that.
That keeps you on track and helps you make the right choices even when the path ahead is uncertain. Could you give us an example of a company that you think has a really strong just cause?
Yeah, sure. I think Patagonia is a great example.
Okay. What is their just cause?
Their mission statement is, build the best product, cause no unnecessary harm, use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis.
Wow. So it's not just about making clothes, it's about saving the planet.
Right. And they actually walk the walk. They use recycled materials. They support fair labor practices. They donate a percentage of their profits to environmental causes.
So it's really integrated into everything they do. It's not just a marketing ploy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what makes it so powerful. People can sense that it's authentic.
Right. And I think that's what attracts customers to them. They're not just buying a product, they're buying into a belief system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful thing.
Okay. So let's say I'm a listener who's like, okay, this just cause thing sounds great, but how do I figure out what my just cause is?
That's a great question, and it's not always easy to answer. But I think Sinek gives some really good advice in the book about how to start exploring that. He suggests asking yourself questions like,
Okay.
what makes you come alive? Like,
Mm.
what are you truly passionate about? What problems in the world do you feel compelled to solve? What legacy do you want to leave behind?
So it's really about introspection.
It is. And it might take some time to really figure it out, but I think it's worth the effort.
Yeah. Because once you have that just cause, it can really change everything.
It can. It can give you that sense of direction, that motivation, that resilience that you need to succeed in the infinite game.
Right. Because the infinite game is, by definition, a long game.
It is. And that's where things start to get really challenging because it requires a different set of skills and a different mindset than playing the finite game.
Okay. So what are some of those key differences?
Well, one of the biggest differences is that in the infinite game, you need to be more adaptable. You need to be able to change course, to pivot, to even start over if necessary, without losing sight of your just cause.
So it's about being flexible, about being willing to experiment, to learn from your mistakes, and to keep moving forward.
Exactly.
And Sinek actually uses a really fascinating analogy to illustrate this point. He talks about the difference between playing chess and playing, what was it?
Oh, yeah. He talks about the difference between playing chess and playing Go.
Go. That's right. I could not remember the name of the game.
Yeah.
So for those of us who aren't familiar with Go, could you just briefly explain how it's different from chess?
Yeah. So Go is an ancient Chinese board game. It's actually considered to be one of the oldest and most complex board games in the world.
Right.
And it's played on a grid with black and white stones.
Okay. And what's the goal of the game?
The goal of the game is to surround more territory than your opponent.
Okay. So how is that different from chess?
Well, in chess, you're trying to capture your opponent's pieces and ultimately checkmate the king. So it's very much a game of direct confrontation. But in Go, it's more about strategic positioning. You're trying to encircle your opponent's stones, to cut off their supply lines, to slowly but surely gain control of the board.
So it's a much more subtle and nuanced game.
It is, and it requires a different kind of thinking. In chess, you can often plan out your moves several steps in advance. But in Go, the game is so complex and the possibilities are so vast that you have to be more adaptable, more responsive to your opponent's moves.
So it's more about reacting to the situation as it unfolds rather than trying to impose your will on the game.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valuable lesson for anyone who's playing the infinite game. You can't always predict what's going to happen. You can't always control the circumstances, but you can control how you respond. You can choose to be adaptable, to be resilient, to keep learning and growing.
So it's about having a plan, but also being willing to deviate from the plan when necessary.
Exactly, and that's what Sinek calls existential flexibility.
Oh, that's right. I love that term. It's like you have to be willing to let go of your ego, to admit that you might not have all the answers, and to be open to new possibilities.
Exactly, and that can be really hard, especially for people who are used to being in control, to being the expert.
Right. It's like you have to be willing to be a beginner again.
Yeah, you have to be willing to learn, to unlearn, and to relearn.
Wow. That's a lot to take in. So we've talked about just cause and existential flexibility. What else does Sinek highlight as being essential for success in the infinite game?
Well, another really important concept he introduces is the idea of building trusting teams.
Oh yeah, I was really struck by that section of the book. Can you tell us more about what Sinek means by trusting teams?
Sure. So Sinek argues that trust is the foundation of any high-performing team, especially in the context of the infinite game. Because when you have a team that truly trusts each other, they're more likely to take risks, to be innovative, to support each other through challenges, and to ultimately achieve extraordinary results.
Okay.
Yeah.
But how do you actually build that kind of trust?
Yeah.
It's not something that just happens overnight.
Right. And it's certainly not something you can force. But Sinek outlines a number of key principles for cultivating trust within teams. One of the most important is vulnerability. You have to be willing to let your guard down, to share your weaknesses, to admit when you're wrong. And that can be really scary, especially in a work environment where there's often a lot of pressure to appear competent and in control.
Yeah, it can definitely feel risky to be vulnerable, especially with colleagues.
It can, but Sinek argues that it's actually essential for building trust. Because when you're willing to be vulnerable, it shows others that you trust them enough to let them see your true self. And that can create a really powerful bond.
So it's about creating a safe space where people feel comfortable being themselves, even if they make mistakes.
Exactly. And that's where leadership comes in.
Okay.
Because leaders have a really important role to play in creating that kind of culture. They need to model vulnerability themselves.
Right.
They need to be willing to admit when they don't have all the answers, to ask for help, to empower their team members to take ownership and make decisions.
So it's about shifting from a command and control style of leadership to a more collaborative and supportive approach.
Yeah, exactly. And that can be a really big shift for some leaders.
It can, but I think it's essential for building the kind of trusting teams that are necessary to thrive in the infinite game.
Definitely.
So we've got just cause, existential flexibility, and trusting teams. Are there any other key principles that Sinek highlights as being essential for playing the infinite game?
Well, one of the most intriguing concepts he introduces is the idea of worthy rivals.
Worthy rivals. Okay, now this is different from just seeing your competitors as enemies.
Right, exactly. It's about shifting your perspective from seeing competition as a zero-sum game, where one person's win is another person's loss, to seeing it as an opportunity for growth and innovation.
Okay, so how do you go from seeing someone as a threat to seeing them as a worthy rival?
Well, Sinek argues that it starts with recognizing that your worthy rivals can actually help you become better. They push you to innovate, to push yourself harder, to constantly reevaluate your own strengths and weaknesses.
It's like they're holding up a mirror to you.
Exactly. They show you where you need to improve. They inspire you to raise your game.
So it's about recognizing that you can actually learn from your competitors.
Yes, and that you can actually benefit from their success. Because when your worthy rivals are doing well, it elevates the entire industry. It pushes everyone to be better.
So it's a win-win situation.
It can be, if you approach it with the right mindset.
Okay. So how do you find your worthy rivals? I mean, are they just the people who are directly competing with you in the marketplace?
Well, they can be. But they can also be people or organizations that are doing something really innovative or inspiring in a completely different field.
Oh, interesting.
It's about looking for those who are pushing the boundaries, who are challenging the status quo, who are making you think differently about what's possible.
So it's about seeking out inspiration and motivation from unexpected sources.
Exactly.
Okay. This is really fascinating stuff. So we've talked about just cause, existential flexibility, trusting teams, and worthy rivals. I'm really starting to see how these principles can help us not just succeed, but actually thrive in the infinite game.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that these are not just abstract concepts. They're actually practical tools that we can use to navigate the complexities of work and life.
So it's about taking these ideas and putting them into practice.
Exactly.
And that's what we're going to be exploring in more depth in the next part of our deep dive into Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game.
Can't wait.
Me too. So stay tuned for part 2. All right, so we're back, and we're continuing our deep dive into Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game.
Yeah, this is getting good, I know.
A lot to think about.
There is. So in the last part, we were talking about the importance of having a just cause, building trusting teams, embracing existential flexibility, and even finding worthy rivals.
Yeah, big ideas. Big ideas. So I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about another concept that Sinek introduces in the book that I found really fascinating. And that's the idea of ethical fading.
Oh, yeah, that's an important one.
Yeah. So for our listeners who might not be familiar with this term, could you just kind of briefly explain what ethical fading is?
Yeah, sure. So ethical fading, it's this kind of insidious process where our ethical standards gradually erode over time, often without us even realizing it's happening.
So it's like we're slowly but surely losing our moral compass.
Yeah, exactly. And it can happen for a number of reasons, right? Like maybe we're under a lot of pressure to meet deadlines or to hit targets.
Right.
Or maybe we're surrounded by people who are cutting corners or bending the rules.
Yeah, I could see how that would happen. Like if everyone around you is doing it, it starts to feel normal.
Exactly. And then over time, we kind of start to rationalize our own behavior.
Right.
We tell ourselves that it's not that big of a deal, or that everyone else is doing it, or that we're just doing what we have to do to survive.
So it's like we're kind of tricking ourselves into thinking that it's okay.
Yeah, in a way. And the scary thing is that it can happen to anyone.
Really?
Even people who have strong moral convictions.
That is a little bit unsettling.
Yeah.
So if it can happen to anyone, how do we guard against it?
Well, that's where I think Sinek's emphasis on having a strong just cause becomes so important.
Right?
Because when you have that clear sense of purpose, when you're guided by something bigger than just profit or personal gain, it becomes much harder to justify actions that contradict your values.
It's like having that anchor, right?
Yeah.
That keeps you grounded. Okay, so a just cause can help us avoid ethical fading. What else can we do?
Well, I think it's also important to create a culture of accountability,
Okay.
where people feel safe to speak up when they see something that seems off, even if it's uncomfortable or goes against the grain.
So it's about creating an environment where people feel like they can raise concerns without fear of reprisal.
Exactly. And it's not just about whistleblowing or reporting wrongdoing. It's about having those open and honest conversations about ethics and values on a regular basis.
So it's about making ethics part of the everyday conversation.
Yeah. And making it clear that everyone is responsible for upholding those standards.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've talked about ethical fading and how to guard against it. Now, I wanted to touch on another really interesting concept that Sinek introduces in the book, and that's the idea of cause blindness.
Oh, yeah. I love this one.
It's a great one.
It's so relevant.
It is. So what exactly is cause blindness?
So cause blindness, it's this tendency to become so fixated on our own cause, our own beliefs, that we fail to see the merits of opposing viewpoints.
It's like we're so focused on our own agenda that we can't even see the other side of the argument.
Right. And it can be really dangerous, right?
Okay.
Because it leads to this kind of us versus them mentality. Where
Right.
we demonize anyone who disagrees with us, and we refuse to even consider the possibility that they might have a valid point.
It's like we're shutting ourselves off from any kind of dialogue or debate.
Yeah, exactly. And that can be really detrimental, not just in our personal lives, but in society as a whole.
Right. Because if we can't even talk to each other, if we can't even try to understand each other's perspectives, then how can we ever hope to solve the complex problems that we're facing?
Right. And I think we see this playing out all the time in our current political climate,
Oh, yeah.
where there's so much polarization, so much animosity, so much unwillingness to even listen to the other side.
And that's really scary.
It is. So how do we combat cause blindness? I mean, it's easy to say, be more open-minded, but how do you actually do that when you feel really strongly about something?
Right.
Well, I think Sinek offers some really practical advice in the book. He talks about the importance of cultivating intellectual humility,
Okay.
which is basically the ability to acknowledge that you don't have all the answers, that you might be wrong, and that there's always more to learn.
So it's about being willing to question your own assumptions.
Yeah. And to be open to the possibility that other people might have valuable insights that you can learn from.
So it's about being curious,
Yeah.
about being willing to engage with people who have different perspectives than your own.
Exactly. And it's not always easy, right?
It's not.
Because it can be challenging to have those conversations, especially when you feel like your beliefs are being attacked.
Right.
But I think it's so important to try, because when we're willing to listen to each other, to really try to understand where each other's coming from, we can start to bridge those divides and find common ground.
I love that. So it's about moving from a place of judgment to a place of curiosity.
Yeah. And that's how we can start to break down those barriers and have those productive conversations that are so essential for solving problems and moving forward.
All right. So we've talked about ethical fading and cause blindness. Two really important concepts that I think are relevant to everyone, regardless of what kind of game you're playing. But I want to kind of circle back to this idea of the infinite game and talk about what it actually looks like to play the infinite game effectively.
Yeah, let's do that.
So what are some of the key strategies that Sinek outlines for achieving lasting success in the infinite game?
Well, one of the things Sinek emphasizes is the importance of building a strong culture.
Okay.
And he argues that culture is more than just perks and benefits or ping pong tables and free snacks. It's about creating an environment where people feel valued, respected, and empowered to do their best work.
So it's about creating a sense of belonging, of shared purpose, of something bigger than just coming to work and collecting a paycheck.
Yeah, exactly. And Sinek believes that one of the best ways to build a strong culture is to focus on your why.
The why.
Why does your organization exist? What problem are you trying to solve? What impact do you want to have on the world?
And he talks about the importance of communicating that why clearly and consistently to everyone in the organization.
Right. Because when people understand the why behind their work, they're more likely to be engaged, motivated, and committed to the organization's success.
And I think that's true not just for organizations, but for individuals as well.
Absolutely.
Like if you know your why, if you have that clear sense of purpose, it can really help you stay focused and motivated even when things get tough.
Totally. And it can help you make decisions that are aligned with your values.
Okay, so we've got building a strong culture and focusing on the why. What else does Sinek recommend for playing the infinite game effectively?
Well, another important strategy he talks about is leading with courage.
Leading with courage. Okay.
And this is about being willing to take risks, to challenge the status quo, to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's unpopular.
So it's about having the courage to be different, to go against the grain, to do what you think is right, even when it's hard.
Exactly.
And that can be really challenging, right?
Oh, it can be terrifying.
Because it often means going against the crowd, speaking truth to power, taking a stand, even when you know you might face resistance or even backlash.
Right. And it's not always easy to know when to take those risks or how to do it effectively.
So what advice does Sinek give about leading with courage?
Well, he talks about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who support you, who believe in your vision, and who are willing to challenge you when you need to be challenged.
So it's about building a strong support network.
Yeah, and it's also about being clear about your values and your intentions.
Okay.
Because when you know what you stand for, it's easier to make decisions that are aligned with those values, even when it's difficult.
That makes sense. It's like having that moral compass that guides you.
Right. And it's about being willing to learn from your mistakes, to adapt your approach, and to keep moving forward, even when you face setbacks.
Because in the infinite game, there are always going to be setbacks.
There are.
There are always going to be challenges. But the key is to not let those setbacks define you.
Right.
It's to learn from them, to grow from them, and to keep playing the game.
Exactly. Because in the infinite game, the goal is not to win, it's to keep playing.
To keep learning.
Yeah.
To keep growing.
And to keep making a positive impact on the world.
I love that. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about finite versus infinite games, just cause, ethical fating, cause blindness, trusting teams, worthy rivals, existential flexibility, building a strong culture, focusing on the why, and leading with courage. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for navigating the complexities of work and life. What about you?
Yeah, me too. It's a lot to process, but it's all really good stuff.
It is. So in our final part of this deep dive, I want to kind of tie all these concepts together and talk about what it actually looks like to live and work with an infinite mindset.
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
It is. How do we take these ideas and actually put them into practice in our everyday lives?
Exactly.
So stay tuned for part 3, where we'll be exploring that question in more depth. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. We've covered so much ground. And this last part, I really want to focus on like the practical application of all these ideas.
Yeah, for sure. How do we actually live and work with an infinite mindset?
Exactly. So one of the things that Sinek talks about in the book that I found really helpful is this idea of shifting our focus from outcomes to process.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Because in the finite game, it's all about the outcome.
Right.
Like
right.
Who wins, who loses, who gets the promotion, who gets the trophy.
Yeah, it's all about the destination.
But in the infinite game, it's more about the journey.
It is. It's about the process of learning, growing, and making a contribution.
So how do we make that shift? I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the rat race and focus on those external markers of success.
It is. And I think it starts with recognizing that the outcome is often beyond our control.
Okay.
Like, we can't always control whether we win or lose or whether we get that promotion or not.
Right.
But we can control our effort, our attitude, and our approach.
So it's about focusing on the things that we can control.
Exactly. And it's about finding joy in the process itself. Like, if you're only focused on the outcome, you're going to miss out on all the little moments of satisfaction and accomplishment along the way.
Right. It's like you're so busy looking ahead that you forget to appreciate where you are right now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think mindfulness comes in.
Okay.
Like being present in the moment, appreciating the small wins, and savoring the journey.
So it's about shifting our mindset from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset.
Exactly. And recognizing that there's enough for everyone. Like, we don't have to compete for a limited slice of the pie.
Yeah.
We can actually collaborate to make the pie bigger.
Okay. Now, another thing that Sinek talks about that I think is really important for playing the infinite game is building long-term trust.
Oh, yeah. That's essential.
And he argues that trust is not something that can be built overnight.
It takes time.
It takes consistency.
And it takes a willingness to be vulnerable.
Right. Because trust is about more than just being reliable or competent.
It is. It's about being authentic, being transparent, and being willing to let people see your true self.
And that can be scary, right?
It can be, but it's also incredibly rewarding because when you have that deep level of trust with someone, it allows you to connect on a much deeper level. It allows you to collaborate more effectively, and it allows you to achieve things that you could never achieve alone.
And I think that's true not just in our personal relationships, but in our professional lives as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, think about the most effective teams you've ever been a part of.
Okay.
Chances are they were built on a foundation of trust.
Right. Because when you trust the people you're working with, you're more likely to take risks, to be innovative, and to support each other through challenges.
Exactly. And that's what allows teams to achieve extraordinary results.
So how do we build that kind of trust?
Yeah.
Especially in a world where it seems like everything's moving so fast and people are so quick to judge.
It's not easy, but I think it starts with being intentional about it. Like making a conscious effort to build relationships, to communicate openly and honestly, and to be there for each other when it matters most.
So it's about investing in relationships.
It is. And recognizing that relationships are the foundation of everything. Like, without trust, you can't have collaboration, you can't have innovation, and you can't have lasting success.
So trust is really the key to playing the infinite game.
Yeah, it's the foundation of everything.
This has been such an insightful deep dive into Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game. We've covered so much ground, and I feel like I've learned so much about how to approach work and life with a more purpose-driven and sustainable mindset.
Me too.
So as we wrap up, I wanted to kind of leave our listeners with a final thought, and that is that the infinite game is not a spectator sport. It's something that we all have to actively participate in. So I encourage you to take what you've learned from this deep dive and start applying it to your own life. Think about your just cause, your worthy rivals, your trusting teams, and how you can cultivate an infinite mindset in everything you do.
And remember, the goal is not to win, but to keep playing, to keep learning, to keep growing, and to keep making a positive impact on the world.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. Keep playing the infinite game. See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.